haven't passed it yet, have you? I'm Bob. I'm an alcoholic. Sober through the grace of God and AA since the 10th of December, 1967. For that, I'm very grateful. I'm about to give one of the most unnecessary AA talks I've ever given. It's been an extraordinary... I heard someone say, they said it after the last talk, I've heard all these speakers before, but I think this is the best I've ever heard each one of them give. And that... Jason pulled it off pretty good, having to give 2 talks 2 nights in a row. That's one of the harder things to do, and he did a magnificent job. Katie, God, it's good to see you, kid. That's been a rough couple of years, and you have done it with grace. Thank you for your contribution. You're a hell of a lady. And Amy, it was like I'd never met her before. I mean, the change we see sometimes in each other are just staggering, and that, for me, that was it was wonderful. And you are... And I enjoyed the panel, so everybody, thank you. And Tommy, or I guess Joe, I'm a little worried about your low energy. Really cool, thank you. And Tommy, that was awesome. Really was special. And for Georgia and myself and Harold, we're just... excuse me, Larsine. They bill her as an Al-Anon. It's one of the best overall talks there is in our fellowship today. Just extraordinary. Thank you, dear. That's really cool. Vincent, I know. Victor. Who would have thought when Victor started that wonderful talk that he was going to end up manning up and doing the deal that he does? I mean, it was a powerful story and very wonderful. And then there's the last 3 of us that are in deep doo-doo, so good luck. I started drinking when I was a freshman in high school, 4'11", 95 pounds, second smallest kid in the school. I'm one of 7 kids. Mom sent the older ones to school early. And I went to a Catholic military high school on a college campus. We drank in high school. We had fraternities. We drank in high school like people drink in college. Our parents were the Second World War people that, drank hard, played hard, and lived hard, and made life look pretty attractive, and we stole their booze and dressed up in suits and found places that would serve us alcohol. And of my 6 closest high school friends, 4 of us are members of Alcoholics Anonymous, 2 of our wives, and we have 2 or 3 very active members of Al-Anon. My wife is 57 years active in Al-Anon. And been an awesome partner. It's been a great run. We've been married for 57 years also. We had gone together and then broken up. I went to a party and I was just so drunk I could hardly talk. And I went up to her and mumbled something about, "Would you meet me tomorrow?" She said, "Okay." She's there with another date. And we met, and I asked her if she'd consider getting back together and considering the idea that we move forward towards marriage. And she said, yes. Now, she was a psychiatric nurse working in an alcohol ward. So while she's attractive, she's one sandwich short of a picnic. I will assure you. Done a very good run. I drank a lot in high school. I got, arrested. I was the guy that made the false ID cards. I was, and I just loved drinking. It just made me feel equal. When you're the smallest kid in your class, and then as time grew on, I grew a foot in high school. But by the time I finished high school, my drinking problem was a loud subject of conversation in my wonderful home. I had a great dad. He was my hero. He was an extraordinary guy. And my mother, we've been talking about women a lot. What a panel of strong women you've brought to this function. I remember a number of years ago in San Francisco, maybe 35 years ago, I did a bunch of work with EST, which was a personal transformational type thing. And I went out and I did a course in San Francisco, and on the third day we discussed women. And they talked about how women take these little creatures, Genghis Khans, and teach them how not to kill people for ice cream cones and behavior modify them, and how strong they were. And I remember saying I asked the guy, I said, if our mothers are that important, why do I have much more memory of my dad? He said, your dad was episodal. He came and went. He said, you could swim in your mother. And from that moment on, I was able to see the enormous contribution. The mothers of the group that we grew up with, they could have run corporations, they could have done anything. They were, and in those days, if you had less than 7 children, you had a reproduction problem. My friend, I lived in a Catholic ghetto. We had a dozen, 10, 7, so extraordinary. So when I finished high school, I had a chance to go away. I was going to go away to school. I went to the University of Notre Dame. 12 of yeah. So I thought my drinking would become normal. Get away from my father. Get away from the little bit of police trouble I had. I became the class drunk at Notre Dame. I started out as a B+ student, ended up as a 2.000 guy. I walked out of Notre Dame in the middle of my senior year. I was in civil engineering, carrying 25 credits a semester, not going to class. It gets kind of tough to bluff your way through a thermodynamics exam. It doesn't work. Last year, I gave a talk at Mishawaka, neighboring city of South Bend, Indiana, and I went down and we had a priest drive this RAA host, and Linda and I around the campus in a golf cart. And the campus is just doubled. The amount of money these universities are spending on building buildings is just extraordinary. I tried to get a sense of who was that 18, 19-year-old kid that took a left-hand turn sometime in his sophomore or junior year and became a full-time drunk. And they used my room as a study hall. I was just never, and I couldn't get it. It made no sense, and it was not obviously a conscious decision. When I left Notre Dame, I was due to be commissioned. I was in ROTC, and I had to get a medical release. The medical release I got was for alcoholism. I was diagnosed an alcoholic when I was, 18 or 19. I kept on having near-death experiences, car accidents, and that sort of stuff. And I ran into the psychiatrist that diagnosed me as an alcoholic. I thought that was so stupid. I just couldn't believe it, but it got me out of the service. I came back home, finished school to a set of very disappointed parents. And I finished school at a local university, and when I finished school, my dad asked me to leave home. He said, "We love you, but we don't know what the hell to do with you." And I got a job at a liquor store. It's important to use your gifts. And I'm sleeping around. I rented an apartment for a while. I worked at a liquor store for about 6 months. I'm a thief in addition to some of my other. I'm stealing booze. We're stocking the refrigerators, and then when you got empty cases, you took them up through the little escalator and put them out back, and I would throw a fifth in about every third box. Come back and get it at midnight. I lost that job. I was delivering booze one day, and I backed out of a driveway with the truck and knocked the little girl off her bicycle now she was not hurt, but she could have been, and she was under the back end of the station wagon. I picked her up, had her in my arms, and she pointed down the alley. I asked her where she lived. And I ran down the alley. People started to come out of their houses, and I was standing in front of the house I was born in, holding this little 6-year-old girl. And it was one of those moments where you looked and you said, how in hell did you ever end up, one of those flashes about who you are and what you do. I quit that. I got fired. I went and worked as a waiter for about, 6 or 9 months. I'm waiting to get drafted. The Vietnam War is on. I'm no longer exempt. And I went and applied to officer. I got back together with, I don't know when the hell that happened. So somewhere in there, I got back together with Linda, and we became engaged, we married. I applied to officer candidate school. I get accepted into OCS, and they lose my file, and they ask me to come back and take another physical. I go back and take the physical for the third or fourth time, and they fail me for a hearing problem. So now I don't have to go to Vietnam. So now I'm engaged. I get a job as executive trainee at a manufacturing concern. I buy my first automobile. I thought, hey, I'm going to be a grown-up. Only I can't quit drinking. I am now the company drunk. I am falling asleep at my desk. I use up my sick leave in the first, 2 or 3 months at work. I'm sleeping my hangovers off in the dark room. The photographer is hiding me. I quit that job just before I'm sure I was going to be let go. And when I went back to make amends to the guy who hired me, he said, God, you interviewed so well. I said, yeah, we do. We have performance issues, but we interview well. I got a sales job selling adding machines for burros, and I guess I had that job a couple of months, and I went on a 4-day drunk. And I woke up a Thursday morning sometime in July of 1967, hugging the toilet, doing my morning exercises, and that was my moment of truth. To tell you how disgusted I was with myself would be difficult. I had great examples of my dad and his friends about what it was to be a man and what it was to be a man, and I was far away from that, I'll tell you. I talked to an old-timer down at Central Office, and he got on another line and called a couple of guys and said, could you go meet 2 guys at the St. Clair Broiler at 6 o'clock tonight? I thought, yeah, I can do that. As soon as I hung up the phone, I thought, oh, my God, you're 23 years old. I mean, give me a break. This is, but I wanted to go see what an alcoholic looked like, so I did. Sat in a booth at this broiler. It's about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from our house. And 2 men called on me. One guy was 6 months, one guy was 6 years. And they said, we're from AA. We had a drinking problem. Found an answer for it. Want to share it with you. If it helps you, that's great. If it doesn't help you, don't worry about it. It helps us talking to guys like you. And they told me the story. And they changed my life. I had been in front of every kind of help a young person could be in front of: doctors, lawyers, Indian bishop, priests, nuns, psychiatrists, proctologists. But I had never talked to another person with a drinking problem. And in a matter of 40 minutes, these 2 guys altered my life. Took me to my first AA meeting that night. I met my sponsor at that meeting. And my sponsor got sober in 54. Got sober in 54 or 53? 54. And he was the 12-step champion of the Uptown group of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got to be his wingman. And I got him he recognized my last name because my grandmother worked at a dairy co-op with his wife. So I get, luck. I get the guy, in this large AA group. And I started to launch my career. I drank twice after walking in the front door of AA, once on a business trip to the West Coast and once on our honeymoon. And we honeymooned in Mexico, where the divers dive off I dove off those cliffs on my last drunk. I'm in the audience watching a world's high diving contest. I thought, God, that's not so tough. And I get up to about 90 feet. I split my swimsuit. I cut my leg. I'm stuck. I can't get up. I can't go down. I'm really stuck. I'm looking at the waves, trying to figure out the time it. Trying to decide whether to jump or dive. I finally figured out, screw it, and I dove. God watches after fools and drunks. I would have jumped, I would have died. You have to get out 32 feet to hit the center of the channel, and you can't jump 32 feet horizontally. 10 years later, Linda and I were down there with the kids, and we were watching the divers at midnight, and I said, God, that's the dumbest thing I ever did. She said, it's not even in the top 10. So I come back, I turn myself into my sponsor, and I'm a very active member of AA. My gift is I loved AA from the moment I walked in the front door. I can't tell you how many young people I work with that were not ready, did not like it, and I liked it a lot. And I was on a honeymoon through almost my entire first year. I just loved the language, I liked the steps, I got this. I was as confused about why I turned out to be such a horse's ass as everybody else in my family was confused. I mean, I was a kid who, looked pretty good on paper, but if you had followed me around, you wouldn't be impressed with my record. And I thought, now that I've finally found out what the hell's wrong with me, and I'm going to get sober, life's going to be okay. And so I'm going to, a meeting today. I'm, just couldn't get enough. I mean, we're going to open houses, and after the open houses, we go to someone's house, and the women drive home, and the men talk till dawn. We're bringing up the sun. I just couldn't get enough of those conversations. I had 5 or 6 serious manageability issues in my life. I couldn't get up in the morning. I later found out that it had something to do with when I went to bed, but I did not understand that. I'm a money spender. I spent more money than I made. If you do that over a long period of time, you end up in debt. Just want to report that to you in case you don't know where that's going. Linda's a registered nurse. I'm an unhelpful husband. She's getting up at 6 and going, or earlier, going to work. Even when we started to have kids, and all I want to do is AA. And I had a gambling problem, I think. It was more of a hobby. 4 or 5 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week. But I'm making close to $5,000 a year playing backgammon, which is, I'm only making $6,000 a year in my salary, for God's sake. So it was kind of like a second job. And I had some work. I had trouble getting to work and staying at work and working at work. Other than that, I was a good worker. These were not monthly problems or annual problems. These were daily problems. And one by one, after my first year, or around the end of my first year, I started these, defects of character started. My first inventory was like a third-grade art project your mom put on the refrigerator. I mean, it was my secrets. I did not get to the causes and conditions. We're doing a lot of talk, wonderful talk that Amy did. But most of us, the first time around when we do an inventory, we do not get causes and conditions. Our insight about ourselves is so shallow and so external that it isn't until we often get to the second and third run at the inventories where we start to get a sense of what's really going on. And so I have this strong belief. Now, I've got all these problems. And my second didn't bother me a hell of a lot. In my second and third year, they're starting to bother me. In my fourth and fifth year, they're really bothering me. And in my sixth and seventh year, they're eating my lunch. Now, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had a wall built up around me, and it said, you like me, but you only like what I let you see about me. If you could see everything about me, you wouldn't like me. I don't like me. Who knows more what a lousy, crummy, insufficient person I am than me? I'm walking around comparing my inside with your outside. But I started to tear that wall down when those guys called on me and when I had my first four-step and I made a discovery. The discovery was that I'm not unique. My personality is unique, but not my illness, not my behavior. And what worked for you could work for me. I had a real sense of hope. And little by slowly, I lost that sense of hope over the next 6 or 7 years. I'm going to a meeting every day. I'm starting to sponsor people. I'm giving AA talks. And I'm still gambling. I'm still a lousy worker. I'm still an unhelpful husband. I'm still a money spender. I just thought, I'm a great starter and a poor finisher. I don't finish anything. Why? I have no idea why. I don't know when I made the idea to start to have my life be the easier, softer way, but that's what I did. And that's what I was doing. And I had great examples, and I kind of knew what I had to do was find out what God had to do with Wednesday. I had great examples of people who had spirituality, the old-timer. Other gift, I love the old-timers. And but I'm not going to go turn myself into, I got to get rid of one or two of these defects of character before I go turn myself in, and I just couldn't do it. I found myself at the end of my 7th or into my 8th year thinking about putting a gun in my mouth. I am so tired of being a loser who looks good and should do well and is well equipped. I was born on third base. I mean, I had this intact family. I've been congratulating myself for hitting a triple. I mean, there was no explanation for how sorry my life was. And finally, at the end of my 7th or beginning of my 8th year, I went back through the steps for the third time. Powerless and unmanageable? Anybody with a room temperature IQ could have figured that out. I just couldn't believe how powerless and unmanageable I was. Came to believe that a power greater than myself would restore me sanity. I had lost step 2. I believed it for you. I believed it for us. I didn't believe it for me. I'm 8 years sober and my pants are on fire. This is how my life story turns out. It's always this way. And through the depression that I was going through at that time, I had to reclaim step 2, and I reclaimed step 2. I did step 3 on my knees with my sponsor in the office. We had never done that before, but I started to hear the California talkers talk about doing that. I wasn't really good with the book in those days, and I did that with my sponsor. And my first 2 fifth steps were done with clergy, which was what our practice was in the group. And then I started to hear the people from California talk about doing it with their sponsors. And I thought, so I asked my sponsor, yeah, I'll do that. And I said, I feel like I'm dying of thirst lying next to a lake. I said, I think if you came to my house and talked to me with my set of problems, I could give you some reasonable advice about what to do. I just can't or won't do it. I am so bloody sick and tired of can't or won't do it that I could just crap. And I think I'm ready to do what's next. And I did my fifth step with them. We cried and talked a little bit. And he said, look, you've got a lot of issues around work, money, success, failure. He said, I want you to go find a psychologist that works with business people. I'm a mailman. I want you to go find a psychologist that works and start that conversation with him and bring the conversation back to me, and you and I will discuss that with respect to your program. Crap. I didn't want to have outside help. It made me look like I had a crappy program. Hello. You know. And so I get this psychologist recommended, and he wants to get my wife involved. When your wife's in the room, there's just a lot of information that isn't necessary to the process of recovery. And a lot of it's embarrassing. But yeah, I'll get my wife involved. He wanted the kids involved. I thought, Jesus. So I'm in this room. We're there for a month or so, and I'm talking to this guy that my company's going to go broke. I mean, I'm busting my ass 2-3 hours a day. And don't worry about it. It doesn't happen in Tennessee. It's only in Minnesota issue. And I've lived in this town all my life. I'm in the real estate investment business, and I'm going to go broke and lose everything I have. And he looked at me and he said, why are you so afraid of failing? And I felt like he struck me. And I wanted to punch him, is what I wanted to do. I said, look, you're a doctor. I said, you go broke, you just wait 6 months, take your little sign, walk down the hall, pound it on another door, and you're making $100,000. I'm in the investment business. I'm going to go broke. I'm going to lose everything I have. Nod your head up and down if you understand that. And he looked at Linda. And he said, if Bob lost everything he had, would he lose you? Linda said, no, wouldn't lose me. He asked the kids the same question, and of course they said no. If you can't lose, you can't play. What I discovered in that man's office was fear, which has been a subject of conversation throughout this weekend also. Fear for me was dogs, snakes, and tall buildings. Now, you think a guy who had done 3 inventories would have done a fear inventory, but I did not. I was not as good with the book then as I am now. And I'm afraid of being a husband. I'm afraid of being a dad. I'm afraid of work. I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of success. 2 weeks later, I'm in my living room. I went to work late, left early, got in a backgammon game. I won $500. I missed dinner. I missed the AA meeting. I came home and got in a fight with my wife. One of those things you like to have videotaped and sent to the General Service Office to show what 8 years can do. I'm so desperate. I'm reading the Bible in the living. I just can't stand it. And I realized that I had tried as hard as I knew how to try, ineffectively, to clean my act up, and I had failed. And I don't know if I ever could have said those words with the meaning that I said them that night. And I was given the opportunity to take the 6th and the 7th step of the program at a level that I'd never done before. The 6th step said we're entirely ready to have God, not Bob. Remove our defects of character. 7th step said we humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. I have spent 7 or 8 years trying to get rid of them. I don't have the power. I am the pipe, not the well. It happens through me, not by me. And I went down and I said those prayers. And I quit gambling that night. Now, I've been trying to quit gambling for a long time. I turned the checkbook over to my wife, and she started to manage the family finance. Not all spouses are good managers. She is, and she had us in much better shape in a relatively short period of time. I made appointments about going to work, working at work, and staying at work with my sponsor. I'm supposed to be selling real estate investments, and I don't make sales calls. I just lie about my activity. I'm a salesman, and I don't make sales calls. And all of a sudden, it didn't matter anymore if I wanted it or not wanted it. It was an AA activity. I did AA. I just didn't do work. And I hired someone to call me at 5:30 every morning. Now, I was getting up at 9, so, moderation. This woman called me. I go to 6 o'clock Mass every day of the week. And after Mass is over, I'd go to the side altar and I'd kneel and say a few prayers, and then I'd say, God, give me your mind. I don't know what to do. Well, baloney. I knew what to do. I either couldn't or wouldn't do it. And I'll be damned. I think he gave me his mind. I have always been smart. I've just not been effective. It's not funny, and it is terrible. And it is a terrible combination. And all of a sudden, the guy who couldn't make sales calls was making sales calls whether he wanted to or not. And all of a sudden, I'm the guy who's doing the financial analysis of the deals we're peddling. And over the next period of time, I started to become effective. I started dating my wife every Thursday night or Friday night. And I did that for 30 years. And when I was out saving the world, giving AA talks, we do it on Thursday or Sunday. When I came back, it was a real live, dangerous day. She got dressed up, we went out, we didn't go to a movie, and it was our romantic night, and it saved us. We were out talking about kids and bills, which is not how we fell in love. So we had I took take her to Chicago and shack up for the weekend. I started treating her like I would a woman who I just started a new relationship with. And it was relatively awkward at first, but it was the best thing we had ever done for our marriage over a period of time, to know that when Friday comes, it's our night. It's us, not the kids, not that conversation. It's just like we were. And it was very cool. My life took off like it was on a rocket ship, and for the next I don't know how many years, I made enough money to burn a wet elephant. And some of it was luck, some of it was being in the real estate business at the time that I was in, and so I've got the big house. It's got 11 bedrooms. I've got 2 Mercedes. I got a big one and a little one. I'm the guy in the $1,000 suit coming to the meeting, thinking that God had blessed me because of what a wonderful member of AA I was. How would you like me in your group? I mean, so while there are problems with failure, there are some issues with success and arrogance. Yes. And then in the mid-'80s, they changed the Tax Act, and I went broke. I lost $10 million. If any of you are praying to be a millionaire, include the idea of keeping it. Doesn't take much more, in your prayers. And I couldn't believe it. I lost it all. Had to sell the big house, sold the Mercedes, bought an 8-year-old Buick. God, I was dying. I had a dear friend by the name of Jerry Jones, who was an attorney down in Dallas. He used to talk a lot in AA people, I was at a party with Jerry at an AA conference, and I'm telling him at his house for about the 3rd time about how horrible my experience is that I'm going through. He said, you've told me this story 2 or 3 times. He says, I don't feel sorry for you. And I thought, well, stick it up your. He said, if this happened to me, what would you think? Well, I said, you're the head of a major law firm in Dallas. I said, you'd be just fine. And he said, that's what I think about you. He said, I think in 5 years we're going to be sitting in this hot tub having the conversation about what happened and how it turned out. And of course, in about 5 years, that's exactly what happened. So we negotiated with the banks. We didn't go bankrupt. We got our business back, and off we went. And all during this time, I'm really an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. During that second surrender that I had, which is, I was really kind of ashamed that at 7 or 8 years I had to have a second surrender. I think we all have to have a second surrender, or a third, or a fourth. you don't get it in the first couple of years. In the first couple of years, we make more progress and change our lives in more positive, circumstantial ways than anything. I mean, it's just amazing how quickly people can put their lives back on course. But there are secondary issues about the causes and conditions that have to do with our personality and psyche that we are absolutely unaware. And you find yourself at that time with your relationships being screwed up, or maybe work being screwed up. You know, I used to sit in AA meetings, you know, and went to a lot of conferences. And I have cried more this weekend than I have in a long, long time. The talks have really kind of gotten to me. And my deal was, when is it going to be okay for me? And I didn't have an answer for that, because I'm doing the deal. I'm doing what I think I'm supposed to be doing. But it was too external. It wasn't internal enough. If you're really going to get the whole measure of what the program has to offer, you have to spend some time with a spiritual activity, with the God of your understanding. You have to move more in that direction. I was born and raised a Catholic. I knew a lot about God, but I didn't have the relationship with God that was necessary for me to maintain a quality recovery. And when I had that second experience, it changed me. I know there were no longer any conditions, and there were no longer any secrets that were going on in my life. And we've talked a lot about secrets, and we've talked a lot about the power of the fourth and fifth step. But when I came in AA, most of the stories were drunkalogs. People would start with their first drink, end it with their last drink, and they'd spend the last 5 minutes talking about the kids, the wife, and the job. But somehow, through the magnificence of the communication that they had, if you could hear the music, and there was a music to these talks, I think today you'd find many of them old-fashioned, but they got the job done. And then Chamberlain, almost single-handedly, but Cecil Corrigal, Holly Martin, different, Mac Cheater, they started to include recovery in their talk. And all of a sudden people were maybe running the steps when they were giving their AA talk, which was not common during the first number of years of my sobriety. And then about 10 years after that, people started to talk about problems in sobriety. Because the room's full of people with 2 to 20 years of sobriety. They're saying, now what? I know about drinking. I know about quitting. I know about Alcoholics Anonymous. I know about the book. I know about the steps. Now what? And that is what this Woodstock format that you're discussing this weekend, why it's more popular, why I think they sell 2 or 3 times the amount of tapes at a conference like this that they do with the old-fashioned one where people just give their AA talks, because people want to know how to get their hands on the knobs and dials that are going to make the difference in their life. What is the problem? Well, if you've got 5 to 10 years of sobriety or 3 to 10 years of sobriety, and I said to you, come on up here and give me a 5-minute talk on step 3. No problem. But often that person's marriage is in the tank. Their finances are in the tank. They got $50,000 of credit card debt. I mean, people are, I've sat in the front row of these conferences with that kind of, not quite that number, because in those days you couldn't get in debt that much. I mean, it was, they controlled it a hell of a lot more. And I just had the sense that Amy and different people have talked about it, that my life, it's not okay. There's something wrong. There's not okay. I've got sobriety. And the other great lie that we tell ourselves is I got 20 years of sobriety, and I'm congratulating myself for the quantity of my sobriety. And there's a lot of serious things going on in my life. So I kind of joke about step 4 and 5. I say, pretend you're working with a guy who's 7 years sober, his pants are on fire, and he's having trouble with the 4th step. Doesn't like the columns, doesn't know what to do. I said, look, just forget about the columns. Just get your ex-wife and your wife and your children, your mom and dad, your last two employers, and two of your running buddies in AA and bring them over to the house and say, look, we have a step in AA where we try to get in touch with their defects of character, and I'm having trouble identifying mine. And then pass out pen and pencil, pen and paper, and leave the room. Most of us wouldn't call that meeting. You know why? We don't want to change. But it's a little bit worse than that. Not only do we not want to change, we don't want to know. You train your wife. We're not talking about that. You want to talk about that? It's going to be a bad conversation. You train your kids. We're not having that conversation. You train your boss. You train your sponsor. Your sponsor knows when you're in the game, when you're in the conversation, when you're not. My first 6 or 7 years in AA, I tried to alter and clean my act up, and I tried and failed, but I still grew. There comes a time where the road parts, and you either go to the left and you build an addition onto your house to accommodate your problems. Chasers hang out with the chasers, gamblers hang out with the gamblers. I won't call you on your BS, you don't call me on mine. Deal? Deal. Bad deal. Or you get more deeply into the program and more deeply into the steps, and you start to get closer to the causes and conditions. And so many of the causes and I don't think we realize that when we construct this ego, that is the mischief. You know, you've got two choices, ego and intellect or God and the program. If you got ego and intellect, you got a 16-year-old running your life. How many times when that sponsee comes over to the house and their pants are on fire and they dump that, basket full of manure, and they're just telling that story at high speed that everybody talked about this weekend, and you look at them and you say, where is God in this? Well, they're almost shocked by the question. There's no God in it. And they could be sober 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And they're stuck. And they're dry. And their program is stale. And they're doing the same things over and over. I can't tell you the number of people that I see with 25 or 30 years that are going to some people that are 8 and 9 years sober, asking them to take them through the book, because they didn't do that when they were, earlier on in the program, and they're now hearing people doing that, and they're watching the changes that are happening in people's lives. People ask me about, how do you feel about AA long term? I said, what do you mean? Is AA going to be in trouble? I said, I don't think so. I said, we are better with the book and better with the steps and better with the program and better with sponsorship at any time in our fellowship we've ever had. And the other question is, where else would you go? I'm serious. Where else would you go? I mean, there isn't any other place in the world that has the number of people putting their lives back together that we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. Where else would you go? So we have been handed the keys to the kingdom. I mean, it is extraordinary, the gift. How many alcoholics get help? 1 out of 10? And then when they come to Alcoholics Anonymous, how many people stay and do the deal? It ends up being a relatively low, fairly low period. I do believe, almost like the book talks about, that if you come in here and you're serious about it and you get into the book and do the deal, that at least half the people are going to get well. And I've watched that happen time and time again. It is just extraordinary. But the real change is what the book talks about being transformational. It's what Jung talks about. It's what Silkworth talks about. It is about dying to your life and being resurrected and changed. And most of us have kind of an initial spiritual event. People were trying to tell me I had a drinking problem for quite some time before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't buying it. I was lying about everything. I was hiding. I had the wall built up, all that sort of stuff. And then the day that I was hugging that toilet and I called Alcoholics Anonymous and I went and met those two men and I walked into a room, all of a sudden I was willing to go to 5 or 6 meetings a week, willing to read the book, willing to talk to my spouse. I mean, where did that come from? I didn't know about that. Well, everybody in the room knew about it. I mean, they can see who's in the game and who's not in the game. Something happened to me spiritually that was not conscious. It was not of me. And it wasn't enough. If you don't follow up on those spiritual events, they devolve and they become memories. They become stories. But they no longer have the energy to drive the spiritual walk that you're going into. There was an old-timer, I want to read a letter. There was an old-timer by the name of Mel Barker from Ohio. Mel probably have 75 years if he was around today. And Mel wrote a letter to Bill Wilson. And he met Bill Wilson in 1951, and Mel was a writer. He wrote the book Walk and Dry Places, and he wrote a book called Bill W., and a good book. And he wanted to know two things from Bill in the letter. This was a newcomer writing the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous a letter, and he wanted to know about why is a 12 and 12 less positive than the big book? Because it seemed like it had changed. It seems like it was less optimistic. Well, Bill was, 12 or 13 years sober when he started the deal, and he was looking at the people in sobriety that were, depressed and angry, and their lives were problematic, and they weren't, and he said he wrote the book to deepen our relationship with the steps. And then he wanted to know about Bill's spiritual awakening. And Bill wrote him back a 3-page letter. And he said, and he's referring to the spiritual awakening. And Bill says, I often fail to make the point that every AA who has a program gets the same thing. Pretty astounding statement. The only difference that I can see is most experiences are strung over a long period of time. In these sudden events, I think the ego gives way at depth in a complete collapse, at least momentarily, and this permits a huge inrush of grace that brings a vision. In most cases, grace leaks in little by little. Therefore, I can't hold that those theologians that these sudden experiences are something very special or unique. If you were to take the sum of your own transformation since you've been in AA and condense the whole business into 6 minutes, you too would have seen the sun and the stars and more. Pretty interesting. I love the way he closed the letter. At any event, he's talking about 1956. At my worst, and it's often been damn bad, the sense of the presence of God has never deserted me. That has pulled me through some awfully tough jams. My doubt about myself as a going human concern, never has there been any question about ultimate destiny for all of us or of God's justice and love. Long ago, I became a pupil of AA all around me. People were doing better than I was doing with themselves in a spiritual sense than I ever could. In my role of Mr. AA, I've been enabled to manage fairly well. But as one neurotic drunk trying to get along and grow, I've often been pathetically rebellious and rationalized. Practically all the sins I didn't have time for when I was drinking, I've fallen for since in the last 12 years of my life. In spite of my blessings and opportunities, I spent 8 years in depression, sometimes very severe. However, there's been a profit for AA in the state of affairs that in this depressed state, it kept me off the road. The only talk he really ended up doing during those years was for Dr. Bob. In fact, I was forced to sit home and ask what would become of AA and what would become of me. The result was the 12 steps and 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous in the present world service structure. So maybe I grew up a little myself. At any rate, I hope. Dr. Bob was made of better stuff. In his personal life, he was always much closer to spiritual achievement than I ever was. He seemed never to have been victimized by awful conflicts, though this is not for sure because he was a real stoic. Unlike me, he was a vast reader of spiritual and psychic literature. He had a great library of it. By contrast, my own reading was very sparse. I've rather relied more on observation and conversation. I guess I'm still a shopper at the theological pie counter, wondering in many respects what it's all about. So, my friend, you now have the latest bulletin on my state of grace. I do hope it helps reduce any overestimate you may have had about me. And I do hope for another thing, the really impossible thing, that someday this society will just allow me to be a plain member. And we talk about him being too ego-bound. He was extraordinary as our founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. We are mind-bound. The mischief of all the mischief in the world is being caused by the mind and ego. We do not want reality. Okay? Why do we have to have a surrender? The biggest reason for surrender is to collapse the ego enough to be able to start to hear something, to be able to start to do something. And so many of us had our egos collapse and allowed us that first start, that first burst in Alcoholics Anonymous. But little by slowly, we built that sucker back up. And many of us found ourselves sober many years and having significant difficulties in life. And the ego, and the other thing that Katie talked about, and Amy talked about, everybody talked about, was the rationalization. When Larcene, the mind will make up a story. Information comes from here, lands on your head, off you go with it. Knowing is the booby prize. I'm sober 15 years. I know about the steps. I've gone through them 3 or 4 times. How's your life? How's your marriage? How's your job? How's your relationship with your children? And we are accepting things in our sobriety that we, number one, don't want to admit. Number two, we don't want to deal with. We don't want to know. What's the answer? Surrender. How do you surrender? How do you explain to someone? How do you surrender? It's of God. It is not, you don't snap your little fingers and you're not back in Kansas. It is not something you can initiate. Okay? So you have to somehow have a practice that gets you deep enough into the spirituality of the program, into your relationship with the God of your understanding. I'm 81 years old. I'm tired of Bob. I've been with Bob a long time. Now, the advantage of that is I'm not as important as I used to think I was. I don't have to walk in a room and have the conversation be about me or have everybody quiet down and listen to what I have to say. I was the president of our company for a long, long time. And I used to think what I said was important, that what I said to my children was important. I'm just shocked as a grandparent how differently you look at children. My God, it is just, with the expectation and demands that I put on my children, some of it, for my own aggrandizement. And today, I just love them. And it's going to be okay. I do not have to intervene at the level with what I'm doing. And what I know is the Eastern stuff. I read 25 meditation books a day. There are one-pagers, and it takes me about 35, 40 minutes, and then I meditate for about 25 minutes, and then I go to an AA meeting. I go to an AA meeting on Zoom every morning at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock Saturday, 9 o'clock Sunday. There's 120 people on the meeting every day. It's a men's meeting, unfortunately. You can't get rid of your ego, and you can't get rid of your mind, and you don't have to. But you have to end up making it a junior partner. As the Master talked about, get up in the morning and put your mind in your heart and get about the day. Okay? The source of our disease is in the subconscious. You wonder why we're baffled about the obsession and the impulse, the idea that, once we start, we can't stop. And once we stop, we can't stay stopped. Why is that? With all the information that we have, why is that? Because it comes from the subconscious. When you get a temptation from your subconscious and it's pasted on your eyeball, you're being taken out by a rogue wave. I mean, there's no preparation for it, and that is where most of the mischief comes from. The people that you could say without any hesitation, do you want to change? Oh, yes, I want to change. No. Your ego doesn't want to change. Your mind doesn't want to change. I really want to change. Well, how long have you had the three issues we've been talking about? I don't know, 5 to 15 years? Anybody in the room got serious issues that are fresh? How is that? And why is that? How is that possible if we have the practice of inventory? And that is what, and I'm not trying to be a hard guy about, the practices that we have to do, but it's a gift. Doing inventory is a gift. What you find out is that Bob is an illusion. Bob is a story that Bob had this perfect magical magnet, spiritual magnet, and I dragged it through the junkyard of life, and I came in here as a 5-foot ball of junk. And little by slowly, the old-timers in the group helped me power wash the damn thing. And inside of it turned out to be this vase that someone told me was a lamp. And about 3 years after that, I found a cord, and we plugged it in. A year later, I got a light bulb. Turned it on. 2 years after that, I found out it was a 3-way bulb. There is something on the other side of who we think we are. The mystics talk about true self and false self. And we start to get access. We bring our damp log to the campfire of AA. And as it starts to dry out, as it starts to catch fire, little by slowly, our consciousness changes. Nothing changes until your consciousness changes. See it or be it. If you don't see it, you are it. So you see a guy 50 years old who's got a real serious anger problem. He didn't see it. See it or be it. And you somehow have to walk in a way. How do you see it? How do you become enlightened? How do you get the transformation that we talk about in the program? Live your life. Chop wood, carry water. What the hell do you mean by that? I mean that life will present you with every piece of material you need to transform your life. You will run into your anger. You will run into your sexuality. You will run into your avarice. You will run into your greed. But most of us remain blind to that. But as you become active, and as you have the privilege of hearing other people's fourth and fifth steps, and you start to see, one of the things that's hard is being a real old-timer is you start to hear people give better AA talks than you give, and they're doing more than you're doing in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a privilege to be connected to the people that I am connected with right now. But this program is not about just sobriety, the quantity of our sobriety. To get the full measure, to get the transformation, we have to start doing some work ourselves, with the God of our understanding. Start reading some spiritual material. There's some great books. I've had a spiritual director for the last 40 years of my recovery. I lost the guy that I had for 30 years, and I just asked a new guy. That guy has 25 years less sobriety than I have, but he's a seeker. I've been in a men's spiritual group for 35 years, and that group reads books, and we share, on those books, and we've been doing that twice a month for 35 years. And I've ended up being able to read a number of books that I never would have read had I not been involved in those meetings. I surround myself with people that are really doing the deal. And it's an encouragement. It is, it keeps it fresh. And if you aren't working with anybody, we just seem to dry out. We become critics. We end up in the stands. We get tired of what people, he says the same damn thing every meeting. He says, every time we're on step 4, he says this. And we start becoming a critic. When you're in the game and you have the opportunity to work with someone or just reach out, what Joe talks about, to that new person, it never gets old. It's always new. How many times sitting in a room like this or sitting in an AA meeting, when someone says something, there have been at least a half a dozen things that were said this weekend that were just boom. And your soul goes, oh, yeah. It doesn't go, oh, I like that. That's cute. I'm going to write that down. It goes, oh, yeah. And it knows it has just heard something that is vital to their spiritual growth. Who knows that? They had never heard that before. We all have a knower inside. But to access that, you have to quiet the mind. The mind is just a constant producer. When you go to meditate and you find out I don't meditate well. Why? Well, as soon as I start to quiet down, it's just nuts. Well, that's what goes on all the time. That's what you're trying to deal with. That's what meditation is for. You do not have to get on every train that goes through the station. Just let the damn thing go by. And be present. And be present. And today, so most of the mischief in my life and most of the trouble that I have had is that I walk around with a grid about what makes it okay, what I approve of, what I need, what I want. Well, life very seldom matches up with my grid. Today, I'm less important. I'm tired of Bob. I don't need the reports that Bob keeps announcing. I don't need the judgments and assessments that Bob keeps announcing. And as a result of that, I am able just to be with what is. Most of my life, I felt like I had a team of 4 big horses that I was wrestling with, and I'm holding the reins back. Now they're sheep, little tiny sheep. But there are very few things that I used to be such a dick as a father, because when there was a problem with my children, and at one time all 3 of our kids were in AA, when there were a problem with my kids, they had to deal with me. I was the overreactor. I was the problem. Why? I didn't want the problem. I want the problem solved. Now, well, problems with people and children and spouses and parents don't get solved now. They get solved over a period of time, and mostly by changing ourselves, not by changing it. And we talked about, happiness being who to blame. I mean, that's what the mind does, is let you off the hook. And to be a spiritual searcher, to be able to be in a process that allows you to hear the things we've heard this weekend, to be able to get our egos out of the way, to become less important, to find the humility that Bill talks about in step 7. That treatise on humility is just so profound. To be less important, to not matter as much as your ego wants you to matter, is a freedom and a space in which we can have that transformation. Thank you.